Okay, right, I'm going to start. Okay, no, that wasn't good. I need to sneeze. Give me a minute.
You sounded like an 80s DJ then, that was classic.
It was the Fonz.
Yeah.
The Fonz sounds tremendous.
Right, everyone, shut up now. Okay, hello listeners, and welcome to episode 34 of the Picky Bastards podcast. Today we are returning with another one of our Mercury Prize specials. So I would like to welcome back to the podcast Mr. Sam Atkins. How you doing, Sam?
Hi, I'm
Sam,
good.
our resident music prize expert, I think.
Expert is a big word.
I mean, you follow every music prize that exists pretty much, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on any of them.
You're more of an expert than me. I'll go with that.
Seems
But otherwise,
fair.
you're okay? How you doing? How's the new house? How's the cat?
The new house is good. The cat basically owns the new house now.
Yeah.
So it's all good.
Fantastic. Well, welcome back. I think it was the album of the decade last time we had you on,
Yeah.
wasn't it? So it's been a few
That
months.
feels like about 6 decades ago.
Yeah, a lot's
well.
changed since then.
But glad to be back.
It's good to have you. And we also have the normal Picky Bastards, the boring Picky Bastards, Nicholas and Matt. How are you both?
Cheers.
I'm doing
Good to
alright,
see you
thank
too.
you. Yeah, nice to hear.
You're good. Cool. Right, so Mercury Prize is coming up. We are going to go through a few questions. We'll talk about all of the albums at least in a little bit, but I'll just quickly let you know what's on the shortlist in case you don't. So we've got Fibs by Anna Meredith, Seeking Thrills by Georgia, Every Bad by Porridge Radio, Song for Our Daughter by Laura Marling, Future Nostalgia by, is it Dua Lipa or Dua Lipa?
Dua. Is it?
Dua
Oh, I thought it
Lipa.
was Dua, okay. Why do I think I know?
Yeah, I knew Sam would be the one to answer that. I don't know what you were trying to
It's
answer.
probably wrong.
No idea why I thought I knew that.
Deep Down Happy by Sports Team, Spook the Herd by Lanterns on the Lake, How I'm Feeling Now by Charli XCX, Kiwanuka by Michael Kiwanuka, Heavy's the Head by Stormzy, Dark Matter by Moses Boyd, and Hoodie's All Summer by Kano. So that's the 12 albums. I'm going to start with 4 questions, and the first question is going to be, what was your favourite new discovery from the playlist? And I'm going to go to Sam. Sam, you're going to have 90 seconds to tell me, and if you go up to 90 seconds, you will hear an obnoxious alarm. So,
Yep.
90
And I'll get
seconds.
cut off
You
instantly.
will. You will. And if you go past that, then we have to close the whole podcast down. So,
Yeah, okay.
So 90 seconds starting now. What was your favourite discovery?
So my favourite discovery was definitely the Moses Boyd album. Obviously, each year there's always like a jazz record or a jazz adjacent record that gets included, and we always talk about it. We always say, "Oh, it's probably not going to win, but it's nice to listen to this," or "It's not nice to listen to this." But this one, I absolutely love it. I think it's such an interesting kind of fusion of genres. It kind of goes all over the place, but every single song feels extremely British in the sense of where the origins of those genres come from. So all sorts of like drum and bass music's included in it. There's a lot of garage sounds, and I just think it's such an interesting initial record to hear from someone that you have no idea who they are. And it made a massive impact for me. Ended up as one of my favourites on the shortlist. So I was surprised that the kind of jazz one ended up being it, but that's the one that I kind of picked out. Yeah.
Fantastic. Is that you?
Yeah.
So I don't get to use my alarm just yet.
Oh, sorry.
But never mind. So
Sad
if
times.
anyone wants to talk about Moses Boyd, we will come back to that. But for now, I'm going to go to Matt. So Matt, 90 seconds. What was your favourite discovery?
My favourite discovery was Georgia with Seeking Thrills. I'd never heard of her, but first time I listened to this album, I kind of just liked it. And then I just ended up playing it again and again and again. And it's probably been the album I've played most this summer.
Wow.
And compared to some of the other stuff on the list, it's making this kind of interesting pop that doesn't feel too safe. It has some newer ideas in it, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's overstretching. And so that's maybe some hints as to what I think of some of the other albums down the list. But there's obviously some big Robin vibes in it, and I love Robin, but there's also some more diverse other sounds as well. I think some like MIA and Major Lazer feelings towards the end of the album as well. And all in all, it's just fantastic.
Wow. You're all doing this within a minute, which is quite upsetting to me.
I know the whole thing's been over in 10 minutes at this rate. We're doing fantastically,
Yeah.
Get on with our days.
Nick, over to you. 90 seconds. What was your favourite new discovery?
Okay, my favourite new discovery is Charli XCX, How I'm Feeling Now. I really want to talk about another album in relation to this one that's on the shortlist, but I can't do it, so I'm going to have to restrain myself quite a bit, I think, with these comments. But I think this is a kind of pop and EDM dance album that has a lot of interesting undertones in it, which give it some more depth than a lot of other albums of its kind. So it has things like, I noticed, in even a few listens, ring modulators and notch filters and a lot of super sub EQs and stuff that really make the song sound more engaging than you might typically expect. I might typically expect in my pejorative way about this kind of genre of pop. So I enjoyed quite a lot of it. I think Forever is the opening track. No, second track is a good example of lots of those tonal moves that they make. I like in that one particular the cleanness of the way the vocals sit with the in the choruses versus the really dirty offset synths in the verses. That was a really good example of one of the tracks on the album. And then 7 Years, another one that I was quite into. Again, a really sort of light and dark dynamics across the track. And it's not a genre that I, obviously, as everyone knows here, I would jump to normally. But I thought, really, if I'm looking for something interesting, it was more surprising than I was expecting by a long way. So, yeah, Charli XCX.
Can you just talk for 2 more seconds, please?
No, because I think I got it perfectly right. That's what you're basically saying.
What?
I was perfect. That's what you're saying.
Every time we do this, I forget how to actually turn my alarm off, so... There we go. Okay, so I'm not going to say my first reaction to Nick picking Charli XCX, but we'll get to that in a minute. Yep. Who's timing me? Is it you, Matt?
Oh, yeah. I got to do that.
Yeah.
Ready?
I'm ready.
Steady, go. Okay,
so I want to start by saying there were 2 albums I hadn't heard on this list that I totally fell in love with, and it was hard to choose between the 2, but in the end I went with Buddy's All Summer by Kano. I think it's an absolutely exceptional album, and without saying too much about the other album I nearly chose, I think the thing that separated the 2 in the end was that this album also has a really important messages, and it deals with that message in a really interesting and nuanced way. I also think it has some of the best MCing I've heard in a very long time. There are a few verses on this album that had me completely enthralled. None more so than the final verse of Got My Brandy, Got My Beats. His flow on that song is just mind-blowing, especially when you consider the difficult and grief-ridden story he's telling. I think that track's definitely a contender for my favourite song on this whole playlist. But none of that stuff about his flows and beats would matter if it wasn't for the story he was telling, and I think that's what tips it over the edge. I think songs like Good Youths, Walk Among Evil, Trouble and Teardrops are just so relevant and important. And then it ends with the song Suck Your Mum, which is the strongest I've heard in terms of challenging racism in Britain in a long time. In previous years, I might have said that these songs would make this album too political to take home the prize, but I think with everything that's happened this year, I'm not sure that's the case. I think this has got a very good chance of winning, and I think it will be hugely deserving. Definitely my favourite new discovery. Well, 2 that I loved, but definitely one of them. That's me.
Cool.
How close was he? Because I'm sure he sat all night last night prepping to do that in exactly around that time.
Was it exactly 85 seconds?
Nah, he had lots of room.
Did I? I must speak more quickly when I'm on here. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the big surprise there for me, which was hearing Nick choose Charli XCX.
Yeah.
That has shocked me.
Oh, it might be.
I feel like he does this on the podcast just to fucking shock us, because he did Florence and the Machine last time. But yeah,
Sam, what were you saying, Sam?
No, just you should have seen my face then. I was astounded.
If only it was a video recording, yeah.
I'm shocked.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to talk about Charli XCX at this point? I can.
I'll jump in. Yeah. I reviewed this for the website when it came out, and I'm astounded because I absolutely hate this album. It's just... And the reason I hate it is it's the most Charli XCX album ever created. Like, it's her defining album of everything that she loves to do. And that is why I hate it so much. I've accepted.
I don't know anything
now.
else she's done though. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
I know nothing. That's all of what she's done.
There was the sort of music that's on this album has been on all of her previous ones, but it just sort of appears every now and again. It's always the one that her like hardcore fans will go for, and then they're the one, and she seems to love it. And the fact that like there's a sequel song to a song on an album she also released this year that came out in 2019. Which was much more commercially driven, kind of had a load of collaborations, and but it had one where she did a bunch of songs with 100 gecs.
Yeah. And
there's a sequel song to that, Click 2, and it's like how it's just infuriating. It's such an annoying album, and it's the sort of thing that I feel like people might have expected I would like, and I just can't. There's nothing I can get on board with it.
I feel like it's one that people maybe thought I wouldn't like, oddly enough.
Exactly. I literally wrote down, Fran and Nick will absolutely despise this. That's one
a pretty good place for me to jump in, I think, and say that I really like this album.
No, you don't.
I do, honestly, yeah. It was the one I was dreading most on the list because of what Sam had told me about it, and also because I knew the 100 Gecs association. But of the pop albums on here, this was by far my favourite. I wouldn't say I fell in love with it, and I'm not saying I wanted to win, but of the 3 pop albums here, it's the only one that would make any sense as a winner for me. I think it's doing something different, feels quite fresh. I mean, I haven't heard her previous stuff, so, it's easy for me to say that without having heard what she's done before. But I think it's an unpredictable album. I think it flits about all over the place.
Yeah, I think unpredictable is a really good word to use, yeah. I mean, I think it moves in different directions that are, within its framework of its genre, are interesting.
Yeah, and I think that was interesting. I think it took me by surprise, and I think that's a nice thing. And I think I really like the track Enemy. I Fully Understand, and I think it was a good album. It's interesting. I did enjoy it. So yeah, that's 2 of us, which has shocked me a little bit.
Wow, I can't believe this. It's the big thing for me is there's like still 100 gecs fingerprints all over it. It feels
really?
like to me, and yeah,
like especially songs were so silly and ridiculous.
Yeah,
stupid horse. I just fell out of the Porsche.
That's the thing for me. It does feel like some of this more experimental stuff and weirder stuff is then being filtered and turned into something more palatable by Charli.
So it works for you then? Is that what you're saying?
It does. I like the first 3-4 tracks. I really like Claws a lot. But because it's just super catchy tune. But I actually found it not offensive towards the end. I just found it got really boring, the album, after the first few tracks. And so I was just like, this is a bit of a snooze fest. So
it's weird because it's a range of opinions, but it's the complete opposite way to I think people might have predicted it would have been like.
Totally
when
agree.
you talk about a pop album, everyone would have thought Sam would be the biggest fan and then you, Mark, but it's turned out the other way around, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I'm still in shock.
I can't believe it.
I mean, I will also say, that things will become clearer from my point of view when we talk about some of the other albums, so maybe it's too soon to say.
So we also had Moses Boyd. Anyone want to talk about that in a minute? Or
let me just see if I can talk about Moses Boyd. I think I probably can. Yeah, I can. Overall, I similarly thought this was... I was thinking at the time when it came out to it, this is going to be like a sort of tokenistic jazz album. But actually, I really enjoyed it, and I think it has an awful lot of great things going for it, and would actually be a solid winner if it was to win. I don't think it's very likely at all, but I think it would be a good winner if it was to do it. It's very complicated and intricate all the way through, and I found that intricacy meant I had to spend a lot of time with it, which I enjoyed doing. It has some real darkness in it, so it doesn't sound... Sometimes my feelings about some jazz music is that it needs to be a bit darker, a bit gloomier sometimes for my personal taste. But this album, like Y.O.Y.O., for example, had like this grinding low-end bass part with this low saxophones and stuff that I thought worked really well and had this kind of gloominess to it, this kind of severity. I can hear... I'm obviously a sucker for Talking Heads. We talked about that before, and I can hear bits of Talking Heads in it as well, although obviously that itself is a sort of jazz-infused world music homage anyway. That stuff that Talking Heads had done all those years ago. So I see that's where it's coming from more. But still, that's something I really enjoyed as well. And also, I thought, is there a track Only You? Only You is possibly the biggest surprise on any of the albums on the whole playlist, in the sense of what I was expecting the album to go like and how that track went. I thought it was really unusual, really went in a whole different direction, which I was really grateful for. And then another one I liked was Too Far Gone. I thought that was really had some good momentum behind it, and I enjoyed the whole album. I would go back to it definitely, which it's not often I would say that for an album of that genre. So yeah, really enjoyed it.
Cool. Matt, Moses Boyd or?
Yeah. I like we've talked about this being the jazz selection, but I think there have been some like that pick has got stronger over recent years. I remember really liking Sons of Kemet, and I can't remember what last year was, but I also think I really liked that as well. So much so that I've completely forgotten.
Too into the one last year. I did like Sons of Kemet, but I wasn't really into the one last year. I can't remember what they were called.
But that said, I think this is one of the most interesting jazz oriented records that I have listened to for recently. It's just the way Nick you were talking about the darkness. It did feel a lot more like dense and visceral than I've maybe heard from a record like this. And then Sam was talking about these different genres that are infused into it, and I have never heard anyone try and mix these genres before, and it totally works. In a way that, as Sam said, is super British. It has a very authentic sound, and specific to a time and a place, which is really effective, especially with, I think, jazz, which doesn't. I feel like quite often you don't associate a time and a place with it. Yeah. I liked it a lot.
Okay. Anyone for Kano or Georgia? Sam, do you want to talk about either of them?
I can talk about both. I'll talk about Kano first. That was, I think, going into the nominations, I think when we were all kind of excited and waiting for them.
WhatsApping constantly.
I think Kano was the one that I was like the most happy that it had made it, that I wasn't sure whether it would. Because that album is just so good, and it's gotten better over time since it came out. I think it's probably one of the earliest releases on the list.
Yeah, it's August last year, isn't it? So.
Yeah, so and I got to see Kano perform it only a couple of months after it came out, and it was such a great live experience. The album really came alive. But I think what you were saying, Fran, I think it's extremely relevant, and it's only gotten more relevant. And some of the songs, I think like Teardrops is one of my favorites, and the kind of like, and then Trouble as well. Those two songs, the way that the kind of production changes so much within the same song, but then flows through the whole album, I think is really impressive. I don't think many kind of like grime acts, and Kano's kind of like past grime, if that makes sense.
He's kind of like that. Do we call him grime or do we call him hip hop? Because he's been around for a long time, hasn't he? And he used to be considered UK hip hop, but now I think people do call him grime. But
at this point, he's just such a legendary act in terms of like he's been around for so long, and so I think he's so much more than that. To me, this is his best album. I know a lot of people really liked Made in the Manor that was nominated a few years ago. But I think this is kind of his defining record, and I'm so glad it's there. I'd love this to win. Yeah, I think it's got a good chance as well.
I think it's, because having been into UK hip hop, I've heard his name for years, but I've never actually listened to an album of his before, and this totally blew me away. I think partly for that reason, and I think what I know about him, it'd be great to see him win. I think he's got a chance. Anyone else, Nick or Matt, want to talk about Kano?
I mean, I can talk about it, although I don't have a hell of a lot to say, but it's not in my other categories. Yeah, so I enjoyed it, and I think it was pretty effective all the way through. Pretty affecting, I should say, all the way through. It was a really consistent album. I think it had musically a little bit of tricky in it, actually, which I really enjoyed. That in sort of the way the beats were put together and stuff. I thought it was interesting that this album was out this year, was on the list this year, as well as the Stormzy, which we'll talk about later, I guess. And maybe I'll reserve some comments about the two when I can speak to them together. I know they're quite the same, but there is a linkage there. So, but yeah, overall I enjoyed it, and I'm glad I got to hear it. I hadn't heard it, and I wasn't really familiar with him at all before this, so it's all new to me, really. Yeah. So, Yep. Matt?
Cool. Yeah. There's not too much to add. I really liked this album. It was fantastic. He is obviously at the top of his game. His previous album is also really good. But like Sam says, this is really his kind of crowning jewel. It's just a little bit of a step up. And I think the only thing I want to draw attention to is just the first track. The way the album starts is just such a fantastic opener. It's really, really sets the table for what he's all about, and it's just there's not even that much like musicality to it. But there obviously is, but the music behind it is very bare and stark, and he just rips into it, and it's just such a bold way to start the album, and then it just jumps from there and keeps going and evolving. And it's cool. I would be happy if he wins for sure.
Great. Okay. And anyone on Georgia? Sam, you said you could speak to Georgia, couldn't you?
Yeah, this is another one. There were so many albums this year actually that were nominated that I was like more than aware of, like listened to loads. And Georgia, actually, I saw her twice this year, and Georgia is the last gig that I went to before it all was locked down. It's literally like a week before.
Wow.
So that was the gig where I was stood in front of James Spearing from Picky Bastards and website, and he was complaining about the tall person in front of him.
Yeah, you definitely should have swapped places. He's tiny.
Realised it was me, which was quite funny. But yeah, this album is just a great time. I feel like it manages to capture this like feeling of like going out to clubs and dancing, and kind of the kind of energy of kind of trying to find that next kind of like ecstasy moment of like just pure like escapism, that's why like the Robin connection makes so much sense. I think it's one interesting thing is that like as a performer, she's like mainly like a drummer, and when she performs the album and when she performs all of her songs, she's around like a full electronic drum kit. So it kind of adds this different sense of it that it's like danceable music, but she's more of like this kind of like DJ performer drummer thing, which makes it really interesting. And I think I want to mention About Work the Dance Floor, because that song is an absolute banger, and that's like predates all of this. It's from like early 2019, and it feels like the build up to this album was very long, but I'm just glad it paid off in the end, because it is a really great pop record, and this feels like the achievement. She's exactly the sort of person who should be getting nominated for the Mercury, because this will do wonders for her career going forward. And yeah, I love it. I think it's a great album.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nick, anything on Georgia?
Yeah. So I feel like the album could have done with some reordering, honestly, in terms of track order, because I felt like it picked up a lot over the second half from the first half. And I will say overall I enjoyed it, and I think it had some really interesting sort of elements, like it had some new ordery stuff going on, but I think it wasn't derivative of that. It was just kind of built off those kind of drum parts and stuff. And I'm interested to hear what Sam's saying about the percussive sort of interest she has, particularly in drumming over everything else, because I think you get that through the album, which is really interesting. But yeah, the opening, the actual song started out, the first track, I found to be a bit too kind of chirpy almost, kind of irritating, honestly, and I had to work hard to get past that to get to the rest of the album, where it got to a lot more interesting stuff for me. Like I thought Never Let You Go was pretty interesting. The mix between the bright drums and then these hard cut synths, and then I also liked sort of the mellow, which had a really glitchy drum part as well, which I thought worked really well. So yeah, I think the album picks up. I don't think it's perfect, but and it's obviously, as I've always say, it's not a genre I'm totally au fait with. But I think it works well if you just have to get past that opening couple of songs that I wasn't as keen on. I didn't actually love about Work the Dance Floor as much as some of the other tracks later on. So yeah,
Okay.
That's me.
All right, question 2 time then. So second question is, what would be the most upsetting winner? And I'm going to start with Matt. So, are you ready, Matt?
Yeah.
90 seconds
You
starts
sound
now.
so pained.
What would be your most upsetting winner? Go.
Dua Lipa. It's a bad record. It's really bad. It's
End of comments.
it feels like a pop record from like 15 years ago to me. It's quite. I don't know how many times I listened to this record, but I would often just skip it because I found it really. It was boring, but also annoying because it did feel like this very. It's called future nostalgia, and it felt very nostalgic. And when you have albums like Charli XCX and Georgia on it, where they're like pushing pop in interesting ways and really melding together different new ideas and creating something that's very now, this just felt irrelevant. And
Irrelevant.
I don't know why it's on this list because it seems to defy the point of this.
Okay. Is that you?
Yeah.
Scathing. Okay. We're going to go to, I just need to restart my timer, but we're going to go to Nick next. So, Nick, what would be your most upsetting winner? Start now.
I'm going to do a really shocking one. I'm going to go with Dua Lipa, Future Nostalgia, which I consider to be absolute trash album. I really hated this album so much I can't really describe. The first song, Future Nostalgia, I think it's the opening track, has this lyric, "You can't handle my sound," all the way through it. And I just think it was so hilariously overstating the freshness of the sound that she thinks she's generating, which is ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, completely forgettable and facile. It just sounds like 100,000 other people who have, over the last 20 years, who've done pop albums who have now thankfully been forgotten. And I just think that's where it deserves to be. The idea that it could be on this list is shocking to me, really shocking and really sad. And then this is where I say what I was going to say about the Charli XCX. That's a total yin-yang, like it's a completely different way of approaching this music and a way that's engaging and interesting and complex, as I talked about. This album is just totally by the numbers and just dull. Yeah, that's it.
Wow. 2 scathing reviews. Okay. Are you ready to time me, Nick? Matt, sorry.
Yeah. Let's go.
Okay, so this was by far the easiest question to answer for me. I think Georgia's Seeking Thrills is not only the weakest and least interesting album on the shortlist by a country mile, but is also one of the least enjoyable albums I've listened to in any detail this year. Within the first 3 songs, it feels like we're thrown back to so many different genres of music that I hope we'd left behind in the 90s. Started out, sounds like some terrible ragga dance floor remix that Peter Andre would have guested on. About Work the Dance Floor spends its whole runtime over one of the most predictable 90s beats I've heard in quite some time. And I feel like I've heard a different version of Never Let You Go by some other pop singer in the charts every year since I was born. Mellow is like a pop version of Chumbawamba's song where they just list alcoholic drinks that they've had that evening, and the delivery is terrible on it. And as much as I struggled with all of those songs, she was saving the words for later. I mean, Ultimate Sailor is just bizarre to me. How that song was made by someone, I don't know. It's awful. And it's followed by the equally cringy Ray Guns. Just totally flummoxed by this being on the shortlist. I know I'm not the target audience, but there are 2 other pop albums here that I thought were at least trying to do something interesting and new. George's album doesn't feel fresh to me at all. I hear nothing of interest in the lyrics, in the music, or the song construction. That's me for Georgia. So yeah.
I'm actually crying.
Did you hit your head?
I'm crying.
It's the worst album I've heard in a very long time. I'll leave it at that. Okay, Sam, are you ready? 90 seconds.
Yeah.
Sam's just
Start now.
gone off in disgust.
I'm not going to be anywhere near as horrifically mean as you 3 have just been. But my pick is Porridge Radio, Every Bad. So I know you guys did this on the podcast, but I just found this completely forgettable. And yet, the only thing that I remember about the album every time I listened to it was how irritating the entire thing was. So it just left me. There's actually a couple of records that I'd say there's like 8 great albums on this shortlist and 4 irritating albums on this shortlist, and this was the most irritating of those. I actually think it's better than some of the really bad albums that have previously been nominated. But I see all these things saying how nuanced the songs are, and I just didn't get any of that. I got nothing at all from listening to this other than irritated with the performance and the lyrics and the repetitive nature of every song. That was it for me.
Okay.
I think you were pretty vicious. Come on.
I kind of guessed you were going to
mean.
It got a bit worse, actually. That was, yeah.
I kind of guessed you were going to pick Porridge Radio. Okay, so we've talked about Georgia already. I don't know if anyone wants to shout at me for my Georgia views. You can if you want. Or
you are wrong, but that's...
You're definitely wrong.
100%
okay.
wrong.
Fair enough. We'll leave it at that. Porridge Radio. I'm not going to say loads about Porridge Radio other than I think it's great. It would be for me top 5 on the shortlist, and I think it's a very good shortlist. I think it's a great album. We've all talked about Porridge Radio. Does anyone else want to say anything? Or?
I'm not going to talk about that one now. No, I'll talk about it later.
I think for me, it's got, since we covered it, I'm less interested in it. But it's still fun, but it's not. It's not like a high quality, like a high watermark for music innovation. I don't think.
I mean, yeah, there's things that could have been listed over it. I think like for me, one thing I did write in my notes though is that I do think it has actually, a lot of the time when we cover albums on the playlist and I love them at the time, I then find that I kind of forget about them, whereas I have kept coming back to that album. I think it's grown on me since then, so I do think it's a great album. But yeah, okay, so that just leaves Dua Lipa. Sam?
So I picked this going into the original, when we did that article on which albums we think should be nominated, and I picked this because this is the pop album of 2020. This is, there's been, I personally, like, through this whole lockdown period, there's been a series of really big sounding, high profile, escapist pop records from like Lady Gaga and the Jessie Ware one and the Christine and the Queens, and these big sounding records, and they've all been great, and this is the best of them all. Like, and I can understand why if you're not into pop music you wouldn't like this. So Nick not liking it, I'm not as surprised.
But then you're gonna like the Charli XCX, so. But
then you liking that, because I just think the pop music on this album is just so much better than anything on any of the other pop records on this shortlist. Like I listed out all the songs that are like that. I think I've probably played this album more than anything else on this whole list, and it's not even my number one overall. But like Cool, Break Your Heart, Physical, Don't Start Now, Hallucinating, Levitating, all of those songs are like, they will define this time for me. Like when I think in my head of what songs I remember, I've listened to this album so much and I love it to death. And
it has been a dark year after all. No wonder you're associating with this album. I was one of, when she first came out a couple of years ago, and kind of started having hits, I was like, oh, it's probably not going to happen. It's probably not going to happen for her. But for me, this as a second album, it's like, it's such a step above what's come before. And I think... is it inventive, though? Is it, just to challenge on that, just compared to this Charli XCX, I know you hate that one in particular, but does this Dua Lipa seem inventive to you?
But what... It depends what you're qualifying as what should... I'm not saying it should win the Mercury. I actually don't think it should win. I think it deserves to be nominated because it is the sound of this year in British music, because it's the most worldwide commercially relevant song.
That's a really relevant point. Absolutely. What is the criteria? We've had this conversation in the past, haven't we? What is the criteria for this?
I don't think it should win, because I don't think it is the most deserving album on the shortlist in terms of the reasons why you would award it, but as one of my favorites, as one I actually would listen to out of choice. And that's the thing, is that like, if you want to listen to something, then surely that's a good thing. And I just find myself going back to it over and over again. And yeah, to me, it's a great pop record. Whether or not it's inventive or not, I don't think music needs to be. I don't think loads of these other albums are inventive. And I don't think the Charli XCX album is inventive. I think it's actually pretty lazy at times. I think it falls back on being weird over having a decent hook and having something that you would want to listen to twice.
Right.
I'd rather have something I want to listen to again, which the Dua Lipa is for me.
So
well, I'm gonna give Sam a bit of backing up on Dua Lipa. Because I mean, I didn't love it, but it grew on me, and there was a couple of tracks that, like Levitating and Good in Bed, that I never really got into. But I think songs like Cool, Physical, Pretty Please, Love Again, I think they're good, fun pop songs, and I can totally understand why they're so popular. What amazed me was when I was looking at the albums on Spotify, how many listens this album has had and these songs have had. I mean, she's huge, so I think it deserves to be nominated. I think Boys Will Be Boys is probably my favourite song on there, and I think it's the first one. It's the one that does something other than just be a good pop song as well. It's got a good message. It's and I think it's a good message to give to her kind of audience as well. So I mean, I wouldn't want it to win, and it's probably in my bottom half of the playlist. But in general, I think it's a good pop album, and I think way more understood why it's nominated than Georgia personally. But yeah, I think it's decent.
Do you prefer it to Georgia then, Sam?
Yeah.
Okay.
I definitely.
You know, you like Georgia, don't you? Yeah. So
I really like both, but for me, like, the Future Nostalgia will be in my top 5 of the year, 100%. There's no doubt about that in my head.
Wow. Right.
Cool.
Next question time. So the next question is, which album do you think will win? And we're going to start with Nick. Are you ready, Nick?
Yep.
Go.
I think the album that will win is Porridge Radio. And the only real reason I think that they'll win is that last year Wolf Alice won?
Year before. And I felt this is actually a worse album than that even, but in both cases I just felt like, how could that possibly have a chance? Like how could that? And then just knowing my luck, it just did it. So I feel like there's not really much criteria other than that. It's still a complete repetition fest. It's still so tedious, and so it has such faux angst all the way through it, with the endless repetition of all those phrases that are so meaningful, that they know their way to their own words. I just find it really, really overly dramatic and over the top in those terms. The music is just really forgettable. There's Pop Song is one of them, isn't it? It's one of the tracks that I find is particularly a good example of the juvenile type of songwriting that I hear throughout this album. Things like I'm never coming back, kind of whined through clenched teeth. It just sounds so obviously petty, really, honestly. So I would really be very disappointed if it wins, but I think it's probably got a good chance because that's just how things go. You miserable bastards.
So that's just based on your previous betrayals.
Exactly. How much time I've been let down, yeah.
I am going to go out on a limb and say that Porridge Radio has not got a chance of winning this. But
okay, well, let's hope so.
I don't think so.
Okay, Matt, are you ready to time me?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Go.
Okay, so while I think there's a few that stand a really good chance this year, I think that the eventual winner is going to be Dark Matter by Moses Boyd. There's a few reasons for this. Firstly, I think of all the albums on the list, it's the most interestingly and creatively put together. I think the way it starts with 3 instrumental tracks and an interlude kind of tricks you into thinking it is just a jazz album, albeit for me it would be just a very good jazz album from those songs. But then on track 4 we go into Shades of You with Poppy Ajuda, which is much more of a sort of trip-hoppy hip-hop song and has one of the best bass lines I've heard in a very long time. I think the introduction of a vocal guest at this point adds something really extra to the album, and that continues with the next song, Dancing in the Dark, which I think is the best song on the album. I think Dancing in the Dark is also another reason why it could win, because I think it has that political element, which I think will play a role considering what we've seen this year, but it doesn't go over the line to, Mercury sometimes seems to have a line about how political an album can be and still win, so I think that might be why Kano might not win and this will. And then after that, it just continues to mix it up in terms of genre. I think some of it makes me think of Massive Attack, but with a more jazzy undertone. And I think we've seen over the years, Mercury likes to give the prize to artists who think about the construction of their album as a whole, rather than just a collection of songs. So I think it'll win for those reasons and for lots of others that I can't get into in 90 seconds. But I have to say, it was really hard not to choose this as my favourite new discovery. I adore it, and I would love to see it win. And I think along with 3 other albums on the list, if it does win, it'll be my favourite winner since the XX in 2010. Stop. Okay, that's me. That was perfectly timed.
Perfection.
And amazing.
You were seconds over.
Yeah, but that's perfect.
Is it?
No.
Wow.
Yeah, 1 second too many is perfection. No?
No.
Okay,
No.
Sam, what do you think will win? Start now.
So I had two for this. The Moses Boyd was one of mine. I think that has a really good chance, but I do think that Michael Kiwanuka, his self-titled Kiwanuka album, I just, everything seems to have aligned perfectly. I think on this shortlist, it sits in its own place. I think a lot of the other albums have similar albums that are maybe competing against them. I think it's very unique in that sense. It's very current. It's very topical. And I'll kind of go into a bit more detail maybe on the next question. Who knows? But
Not giving anything away.
I think as an album, it's the most kind of complete album there. And maybe this is because I'm trying to be like optimistic, not like Nick, saying that I've been burned before. That I think this will win. I can't really see a situation when it doesn't, and I think if it doesn't, then the Moses Boyd one will win. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so that's just Matt left for who he thinks will win. You ready?
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah. I agree with Sam. I think the Kiwanuka album should win. I think it is the best album in the list, and it for the exact same points as what Sam said, it does feel unique on the list. It doesn't feel like it's got other similar albums that it has to compete with, and I think it does a nice job of both. It has both a traditional yet contemporary sound at the same time. It has this kind of rich and kind of classy sound to it, but it's also very new, and it is a very like holistic project. It does sit as an album super well. So beyond it being the best, it also just everything else is seems like it should be the pick, but we'll see.
Okay. So that's all of us. The only one that we haven't talked about before is the Kiwanuka. I'm going to kick us off there, I think, if you don't mind, Nick.
Yeah.
So I think everyone knows I'm a massive Michael Kiwanuka fan. I think each of his albums is astonishingly good. And this was definitely in contention for the album I want to win the competition. I'd be overjoyed to see him win it. I think he really deserves it from his career so far, and just he's a really lovely guy as well. So it'd be lovely to see him win it. I think I'm quite lucky in the respect that I like there's half of the shortlist that I'd be happy to see win. And I reviewed Kiwanuka when it came out, and I think my review, I read it back before this, and I think it came across more harshly than I intended. I think the point I was trying to make at the time was that the media and a lot of reviewers were acting like this was some big surprise and a huge step forward for him, when for me, at least, I don't think it was. I think like he's been doing amazing stuff for a long time, and I actually prefer his previous album. So I don't think anybody should have been surprised at how good this is. So yeah, because I prefer his last album, that's why it's maybe not my choices which should win, which I want to win this. But that said, it is a fucking superb album. Saying I prefer his last album isn't an insult, as I listen to that album probably every week. And I think this one has some of the best moments of his career in Hero, Rollin', You're Not the Problem, and Piano Joy. So yeah, I'd love to see him win. I think he's got a very, very good chance. But I think he might miss out because the favourite never wins the Mercury, and I think he is definitely the favourite. So I think we never see the favourite win. So I think he'll miss out for those reasons. But yeah, what did you think, Nick?
Yeah, okay. I don't have a huge amount to say, and except that I really have never been able to understand what the fuss is about him. I just don't get it. I really don't get it. And I've really, really tried. I've listened to this album and the last one more than once, several times in each case, to try and tune in to what is so exciting to people about him. And it just seems incredibly okay. It just seems all right. It's fine.
Wow.
It's fine. I just don't understand. And it's actually genuinely frustrating me because I would love to know what joy people are getting out of it, because I don't get it. They don't stick with me, the songs on this album, nor the other one, the one I'd heard before. So
I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel sorry for myself. So there you go. So it just seems like it's well produced, solid, sort of well put together, but just not exciting to me. It doesn't connect with me at all. So yeah, I can't say much more than that. Really, I really have no vocabulary for it, unfortunately.
Well,
yeah, I can't say. I can't say I wanted to win on that basis.
Okay. Well, you mean you are very wrong, but it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Okay. So last question. So the last question is, what would you want to win? And I'm going to go first. So Matt, when you're ready.
Go.
Okay. So I want to say, but I've said it before. I think there's at least 4 and maybe 6 albums that I'd be really happy to see win this year. And it took me quite a long time to decide this, but in the end, I realised I was just trying to resist picking the choice that is the most predictable for me. But I couldn't resist that in the end. I want Laura Marling to win this with Songs for Our Daughter. Partly that is because she's one of my top 5 artists of all time, and I'd just love to see her finally get the recognition she deserves. But also I think it's because this album is definitely one of the best on this very strong list. I think it's so well put together, there's so much attention to detail, and it's just a collection of really incredible songs. I think throughout her career I've always been amazed at how confident she is in her music, but this album just exudes that more than any before, I think. I think the way she presents this album just shows that she's finally accepted how much her fans love her and decided that's enough. Because I think on the last 2 albums, she was maybe trying to change it a little bit, maybe trying to do something a little bit different. But I think this album just shows she knows she's on the top of her game and she's happy with that. And I think folk albums never win the Mercury Award, so I'd be very surprised if it does win. But I'd love to see it. I think anyone who writes songs like Strange Girl, Blow by Blow, Only the Strong, and End of the Affair deserves to win prizes like this. So yeah, fingers crossed for Laura. That's me. Who's next? It is Sam. And I think we might already know, but start now, Sam.
Yeah. In news that will surprise no one, I want Michael Kiwanuka to win. I think it's just an astounding album. I'm amazed by it every time. I think last year it was my second favourite album of the year, only behind Little Sims. I just needed to make sure we mentioned Little Sims in a podcast.
Thank you so much.
But no, so for me, it's just so lush and expansive, and I love it's the small details in between songs and the way that the interludes kind of meld into one another. That makes it such an amazing piece of work. I think songs like Hero and Rolling and You Ain't the Problem, the way that the musicians play on those songs and the way that Michael sings on them is just so kind of like, it's so massive and then also feels so honest. There's never a moment where you don't believe a word that he's saying, and I think on an album that kind of touches on things, touches on kind of like violence and touches on how it feels to be black in the UK and in the world, I think it's amazing to hear such a personal album that's so classic. I feel like no album on this list will sound as good as it does 10 years from now.
We'll let you finish your sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Very good. And as it was your second favourite to Little Sims last year, we could arguably say it was in the shadow of Little Sims, couldn't we?
I'm never going to move past this, am I?
Nope.
Okay, Matt, who do you want to win? Start now.
Anna Meredith with her album Fibs. I love this album. I love all her work. I think this is maybe just because I love this album so much. I'm not sure if it is the best album. I think the Kiwanuka album might be the better album. Probably is. But this is just my personal favourite. And I think for me last year, it was between this and Billie Eilish for the best album of, my favourite album of 2019. And it's just because I love the way that she's able to deliver so much emotion and so much vitality through instrumental music. It conveys so much without lyrics, and so I know that this may be a stumbling block for some of the other picky bastards, but for me it was just the way she can go from like this disorientation and claustrophobia to just like euphoria and joy so quickly, and between the different songs it's fantastic, and there's no one that sounds like her. And so to be able to push forward in her own path in that way and I have the utmost respect.
Just hoping you'd drag that last word out a little bit more than you were doing because you had like 3 seconds left, but never mind.
Yeah. No, I'm just perfect.
Okay, no, Nick, not Matt, because Matt just spoke. Nick.
No, I can talk again about it.
You've had enough
Nick.
time.
For another 90 seconds on the clock.
Go for it. Okay, Nick, what do you want to win? Start now.
I think I'm going to go with the Laura Marling.
Oh.
And I'm going to go with it. I want to talk about 2 sides to it, really. I think I'll start with the positives. Fortune is probably the best song on all these albums put together. It's like it's the best single track. I think it's an absolutely fantastic track, and I think End of the Affair and Song for Our Door around it make a really powerful 3-song sort of hit of tracks, which I think is incredibly beautiful. I was a really big fan of the one we did for Album of the Decade, Once I Was an Eagle. This album is nowhere near as good as that, though, I will say, in my opinion. And I think, honestly, it doesn't start very well for me. In fact, I think it doesn't really get brilliant until it gets to Song for Our Daughter about halfway through. So either trimming it down or reordering things would have helped a lot from my personal taste on the matter. Because I think that second half of the album is very, very strong. The first half of the album is a bit more... and this sounds really pejorative, a bit more jangly almost. It's just a bit too energetic for the delicacy of the genre to me, and doesn't really work in that way. So I felt like Alexandra and Held Down I wasn't in love with. So yeah, but then when it got up to that second half, it really got powerful. So I'd almost say it's a fantastic EP, but not a fantastic album. But I think it speaks to my feelings about the playlist, the shortlist as a whole, that I'm saying that. And no.
All right. Well. I mean, you're wrong. You're right, but you're wrong. You've chosen the right album, but most of my favourite songs are in the first 5 songs, I would say. I agree with you on End of the Affair, but Blow by Blow, Strange Girl, Only the Strong.
The last track for
fantastic.
You, all that second half of the album is way stronger than the first half.
It's an incredible album. Okay, so we've... Sam or Matt, do you want to speak about Laura Marling?
Sure.
Go, Matt.
I can jump in. She's obviously great, but for me, I think going off from what Fran said about her appealing to her fan base, it does feel like this album consolidates her position, and it really helps her position, like consolidating this idea that she is one of the big leaders in folk music and one of the strongest voices in that. But I agree with Nick. It's not nearly close to her best albums. I'd put it as maybe one of the albums of hers that I like least, along with maybe Short Movie. I felt it was very background for me. You think that it's not as... You think Semper Femina is a better album? I think there was more points in Semper Femina which I grabbed onto, but that might also be because I saw her doing the Semper Femina tour, and so I got hooked onto that. That's the sad thing for me about this album coming out during this, because I think Laura Marling live, I think she's on BBC 3 tonight, by the way, live with the Proms with a full orchestra playing this album, so do check it out if you can. But I think I'd love to see her live on this album. I think it always does improve an album of hers for me once I've seen it live. So yeah. Sam?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Matt. Did you finish? No. I was just adding words for no reason.
Obviously, I love Laura Marling. We all know that. And this is her... I think this is her best album since Eagle. I think I actually liked the last 2, but in the same ways that you were saying, that this is her kind of returning to going, okay, I know what I'm doing. It's the confidence is definitely there. But then I also sort of agree with what Matt's saying about the more interesting elements of the last 2 albums. I feel like I'll remember them more than maybe these ones. I think this album has benefited massively from being released now. I think it was meant to come out end of August originally. Yeah, it would have been out around now, I think. Yeah, so I actually think that releasing it when it was and then being able to sit with it has made it become more of a big thing. I'm so happy she's nominated, but I'd feel, even though I want Laura Marling to win the Mercury at some point, I would feel a bit annoyed that she hadn't won it for the other 3 albums that she was nominated for over this, because I think those are like all-time classic albums. And
it's her fourth nomination, I didn't realise that.
Yeah, she was nominated for her first 2, and then Once I Was an Eagle. I think this is a great record. I think songs like End of the Affair is I love that song. I love the like country-ish twang on like Hope We Meet Again. I think For You is the weirdest song she's ever released. That is a strange Laura Marling song.
Do you like it though?
I like it.
It's interesting. It's probably the most interesting moment.
Do you know she recorded that on her iPhone, which I thought was pretty amazing.
Wow.
But I love it. I think it's a great album, but I don't think it should win this year. It's probably one of my favourites on the shortlist. But I don't think that this would be the album that would win her the Mercury.
Yeah, I will admit that I think a big part of the reason I've chosen her partly is because I was struggling to separate Moses Boyd, Kano, Michael Kiwanuka, and Laura Marling, and I'd like to see her win because of her career and because of her.
Yeah.
I love all 4 of those albums, and I'd be really happy to see any of them win, but I think it's just Laura Marling that got it over the edge for me, because I just think she deserves to win the prize. And I'd love to see a folk album win the prize as well, because I think it's really, a bit of an underappreciated genre when it comes to prizes and stuff, because it's seen as it's just someone on a guitar, but there's so much more to a Laura Marling album than just someone on a guitar, isn't there? So that's kind of why I chose it, I think. Okay, so Anna Meredith. I'll talk about Anna Meredith. So I really liked Anna Meredith's last album, which we covered on the podcast before Matt was on board, and Nick hated it. Nick despised it.
I don't remember anything about it. I've got to say, that's how much I despised it.
It was on the Green Man play, and you I can't remember the exact words, but it was probably the most scathing I've ever heard you be of an album.
Really?
So
wow.
so you hated it.
Big statement.
I was a fan of that one, and I think this is a step up. I think, despite it starting with a hugely abrasive Sawbones, I do think this album has got a better balance than the last one between songs that are very chaotic and intense and those that are a bit more melodic. As Matt pointed out, I often enjoy the songs with vocals more, and songs like Inhale, Exhale, Killjoy and Ribbons were my favourites here. But I also like Moons, which I think is the best to show her sort of roots as a classical composer, and Paramore, which is an instrumental, is clearly the standout. But then I think there's some real missteps on this album as well. I can't stand the song Limpet, and I can't stand Bump. And I think it's just up against too much tough opposition, so it's not really in the top half of my list here. But I do appreciate it, and I do like her. Nick, seems you hated the last one so much and can't remember it. What did you think of this one?
Yeah, well, I thought this was actually all right. It's actually quite good.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was all right. I thought it was inventive. Genuinely inventive. Which I think...
Your tastes have changed during this podcast. You need to go back and listen to the Green Man episode when we talked about the last one, because you were fucking scathing. So.
I believe you. But yeah, so I'll argue against myself then and just say that I think it's inventive. I think it's sometimes emotionless. That's the worry I had about it. Sometimes it feels like it goes down the rabbit hole so much that it's like a technical exercise, which is no real surprise, I suppose, given her kind of credentials as a classically trained in musician and stuff. It's not it's more thought out than a lot of other genres. So there were songs I like. Callian I liked quite a bit. They were just kind of dark and energetic, which I quite liked. It sounded a little bit like The Knife, if you remember The Knife. And I think if you're a fan of that, you'd be a fan of this in general. But yeah, I mean, other than the fact it was, I swear I didn't put in any other 4 big questions because I didn't hit the high points or the low points for me, but of those 4 questions. But yeah, I thought it was good, and I thought it was, but I thought it was sometimes clinical. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Definitely clinical. Definitely. Yeah. Sam?
I think this was the one I was the most excited to listen to after Matt recommended it for it, and I absolutely hate this album. I don't get what everyone is saying about it. It sounds like someone did like a remix album of like a kids thing. Like those like long videos on YouTube that like those like endless videos of kids songs. It's like a remix album of that. It's so strange, and I'd say stressful is the word. It makes me feel like I don't know what's going to happen next, and I don't want to know. And it's so I just have this was really close to being my least favorite album on the whole shortlist. It's like number 11. I really, really didn't like this album. I don't know Anna Meredith stuff at all. I'm probably the one wrong. You three all seem to like it. So, but I
would say don't listen to the first one. No, I can totally understand why people wouldn't like it. And I think when you say it's stressful, I had written down that it's anxiety provoking, and I think I could only listen to it when I was in certain moods. If I was feeling a bit stressed, if I was having.
But I don't want my music to do that. Like I don't. I want to enjoy myself, especially right now. Yeah.
It was not one I could listen along to while I was working, which is what when it came on the playlist, I would have to skip it if I was trying to do work. It is quite stressful, but I don't mind that in my music occasionally.
Yeah, I like the stress.
Yeah, Matt's just the most laid back person on the planet though, so he needs something to stress him out. Maybe that's what it is.
Have any of you watched 8th Grade at all?
No.
Yes.
Because she does the soundtrack to that.
Yeah.
And the anxiety driven nature of her music really helps the film along in a really interesting way.
Cool.
It's a great film.
It is. Right. Okay, so I think that's all of them from that question. So we've just got 3 albums that we haven't touched on at all. So I'm just going to run past them in the order that they're on the list I wrote down. So first of all, Sports Team, Deep Down Happy. Sam, do you want to start us off?
I was hoping that we'd talk about this. This is the one that was like the closest to being in the upper category from the lower category for me in this list. It just makes it into the irritating pile entirely based on his voice. I just found it impossible to get past that. And I tried, and I really enjoyed the rest of the music. I actually think this would be a really great album. But I just couldn't get past his voice. I think songs like Feels Like Fun and Camel Crew, and I really like them musically, but I just... if sung by anyone else, I think I'd have loved this album. And it would have probably been my big discovery, but I couldn't get past the sung, speaking, shouting at me, shouting through the stereo kind of voice. It was very weird.
Okay. Matt, I have a sneaking suspicion you're a fan of this band. Am I right?
I like this. I don't think it's particularly amazing or that exciting, but it's been really fun to listen to the album. I think it's been interesting thinking, a lot of people have been talking about all this landfill stuff with landfill indie.
Yeah.
I don't think if this came out 10, 15 years ago, it would make any waves. But the fact that it's a little bit more, it has a little bit less competition, I think it does mean it does stick out more to me and makes it more interesting. But it doesn't feel like it's stepped forward in any way since in those 15 years. Even it feels very dated. Even in its references, it has an entire song about Ashton Kutcher, which he was relevant 15 years ago and not anymore, really.
I mean, was he ever relevant though? Was he?
Well, he was. Yeah, he was
because he got married.
A star.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I liked it a lot, but in a way where it was fun to listen to, but it wasn't something where I'm not gonna hold this down as some musical achievement or really listen to it much. I think beyond this.
I'm going to jump in because you said some things that are similar to what I feel. I think I was expecting to hate this album, given what I'd heard and seen of the band so far, and I did find it a bit difficult to get into at first. I think it does feel like all that landfill indie that's been spoken about so much recently, and I feel like if it had been released back then, when I was into that kind of music, I might have loved it. It is as good as a lot of those acts were, I think, but it also feels to me like it would have fit in better at that time. I didn't hate it. I kind of enjoyed some of it. I expected it to be pretty annoying, but really the only song that annoyed me particularly was the Ashton Kutcher one. I hated that. But yeah, while I don't think they're massively astute politically, but then they do have a couple of songs where they have some decent messages, like Here's the Thing. So I was pleasantly surprised given what I was expected, but I think it would be a really bad winner. I don't think it'll age very well, and I already think it sounds like it should have come out a decade ago. My last point on it really is that I feel like it took up a space that an album like The Murder Capital could have had, the one that I wanted to get nominated, and I just think this compared to that it's just not in the same league. So it's a bit sad to not see an album like that and an album like this to get the space, but that's just me wishing that was nominated, I think. What about you, Nick?
So lots of things come out of what you've all said, and my thoughts on it anyway. Most of all, I guess, I agree that this album should not be on a Mercury shortlist. It's not really got enough to it to seem like it's worth the time. I thought it was fun, like several of you have said. I thought it was dated in some ways, but I thought it was derivative of Art Brut in particular, who I absolutely love. And I think it was like Art Brut without the real punchlines. It just wasn't as funny, wasn't as clever, as fast. It just wasn't as good hooks. It was just a weaker version of a great band that would in themselves, even though I do really like Art Brut, I don't think I would want Art Brut to win the Mercury Music Prize this year, so let alone this band. So to me, it wasn't really up to it, which I thought was a pity. There were some moments I thought were, again, energetic enough to be engaging, but it just sounded a little bit tired, I'll say. But I do think it speaks to what, from what Fran's saying about all our votes for what should go into the shortlist and how wrong we were in most cases. And how the sports team has been dropped into that mix is kind of surprising. I suppose you've got to reflect on what Mercury is meant to be, as everyone always does all the time in the articles. Well, what is the point of Mercury? If it's not just a reflection of sales or streams, then what are you trying to measure? To me, this is not what you're trying to measure. You're not trying to measure the album that's the most kind of a laugh, just a bit of fun. That's not really for me what qualifies as the best album of the year.
Do you think there's a reward for that? Maybe they should have an award for that at the Brits.
Should, yeah, exactly. Yeah, Art Brut should adjudicate. Yeah, so that's that. That's all I've got to say on that one.
Okay, that's sports team. Okay, so the next on the list is the Lanterns on the Lake album, Spook the Herd. Matt, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I like this. I think I would place it fairly high on my list, but not anywhere near threatening to win. I thought there was some really good songs, like When It All Comes True and Every Atom. I guess the biggest drawback for me, the sound does drag for me by the end, because it is just this big, consistent kind of warm ball of noise. It feels like a lot of the time, and so it doesn't. A lot of the time, it doesn't feel like you're going anywhere. And so as an album, it's a very consistent sound, but it's a long time to be doing just that consistent thing. And like, for me, it felt almost like Anna Calvi, but without any crescendos. It's like you'd ironed out her music and made it very like flat. But I enjoyed it nonetheless. Probably middle of the pack.
Okay. Nick?
I'd also put it middle of the pack as well, yeah. I would say it was... I thought it lyrically had some interesting stuff. It had a good mix of kind of manifest and more kind of obscure elements in the lyrics. There was a couple of bits I actually wrote down. From Every Atom, I took your cigarettes to our secret place. I knocked on every door in your estate. I haven't seen the Cavalry March for Peace, but I haven't caught a glimpse of you in weeks. I thought there was good sort of indications of stories, hidden stories within that, as well as obvious things, very, very prosaic things. I thought that worked really well. And there were lots of sort of poetic and delicate elements to it. I think overall, though, it seemed a bit too self-conscious a lot of the time. A good example would be Swimming Lessons, I think is one of them, which is very kind of dramatically over the top. It's got a lot of kind of reverb swells which just scream like we're important, and I say that sounds worse than it should really. This is a lot better than Porridge Radio, and yet it's doing something that's a little bit on that same spectrum of like trying to sound like something's really important, I've just got to tell you how incredibly important this is, you know. And I just think that's unfortunately, sometimes it lands and sometimes it's moving, sometimes it falls a little bit flat. Like to use that analogy that Matt just used. So I think it could be a little bit more gritty and a bit more down to earth, and then it would be a bit more powerful, in my humble opinion. Yes.
Okay. Sam?
I agree with kind of middle of the pack for this one. I do think I liked it. It's definitely my sort of thing. It kind of gave me like London Grammar, kind of like some kind of the XX, but much less interesting kind of thing. But as in, I did really like it. It's the sort of thing like on like a long drive in like the mountains or something, and you'd listen to it, and it's very idyllic. But I don't know if it's like Mercury Prize winning album. Like it was nice. I think When It All Comes True was definitely a highlight. I was glad that it was on there, that there was another one that I liked. It's very accessible. If someone was going to say an album that nobody's going to like find annoying or not like, I'd point them at this one. But again, does that mean that there's not much there in the first place?
Easy listening, maybe.
Yeah, it's very easy to listen to, which is nice, but it's probably not a winner. This is like their 6th album, isn't it? I've never heard of them.
I've heard of them before, but I'd say they're probably the smallest band on this list, which I think is... but I have heard of them before, partly because they follow us on Twitter, so that was part of it. But
they are fantastic. After all, absolutely amazing. One of the best bands of the decade.
But yeah, I mean, I think we have a term for Lanterns on the Lake, and that is middle of the pack. We've all said that. I think it is middle of the pack. And actually, a lot of the albums on this list grew on me. If anything, I would say this kind of did the opposite. I think when I first heard it, I thought I was going to be a big fan. It has a lot of the things I look for. It has poetic lyrics. It has pretty good builds. Matt said it has no crescendos, but it is all crescendos. And it has a lot of layers to it, I think. And I do like the album, but in the end, it never grew on me. I mean, I like songs like Baddies, Blue Screen Beam, Swimming Lessons, and I think it ends really well with This Is Not a Drill and Fitting Ending. But on the playlist as a whole, because there's a lot of powerful albums, it did fade into the background and probably middle of the pack. So that's me.
Can you have a crescendo if it's always a crescendo?
Yeah. No dynamics then, are there?
What I mean is there's a crescendo in pretty much every song. Not that it's always a crescendo through every song, but nearly every song has a crescendo. So okay.
That's not convinced.
We only have Heavy as the Head by Stormzy left. I'm going to kick us off. I think the Stormzy album is fantastic. I've respected him as a cultural figure for a long time, but I haven't really listened to much of his work because I haven't really liked a lot of the singles I've heard. But I enjoyed this album so much more than I expected to. We've listened to a lot of... Now, this is why I was talking about whether Kano is grime earlier, because I've listened to a lot of grime albums, and we have on this podcast and during the Twitter tournaments, we've listened to things like Dave, Jay Hoos, Novelist, Skepta. They're just off the top of my head, but for me, this is by far the best of any of those albums. But I do feel like it's a different genre to Kano. So I don't know a lot of grime. I'm not a big expert, but it's probably the best grime album I've listened to. And I think a big reason why is the balance in the album. I think there's songs that have a lot to say, and then there's songs that are just a lot of fun, without going as far into misogyny and stuff as some artists mentioned above do. So I think there's a great example of that balance early in the album. I think the song Crown, he deals with racism and the abuse he receives in the media. Then on Rainfall, we have like a very well put together diss song. And I also really enjoyed songs like Do Better, 1 Second, and I think Superheroes is fantastic. I love the recognition he gives to sort of other black Brits and their achievements. So with the possible exception of the Ed Sheeran song, which is where I'm coming from when I say the singles, because every time I've heard a single like that, I've not been drawn in by it, and I didn't really like the Ed Sheeran song. But other than that, I don't really think there's a bad song on here. I was a bigger fan of this than I expected. Who wants to go?
I'll go. I'll just say that, I think when you say it's not quite the same as the Kano album, it's not quite the same quality as the Kano album by a mile. I don't think it's...
I don't think it's as good as the Kano album. No.
Yeah, I don't think that's not a good comparison for Stormzy's sake. I thought it was all right. I think I found and I've said this before, I think on here, I find the pacing of his actual flow to not be that riveting. I find it a little bit slower than I would like sometimes, and that I find kind of drags the pace down a bit of the songs. I think so. Audacity is a good example of that. I think of that kind of sort of slightly more. Maybe I don't know if relaxed is quite right, because it's certainly not relaxed in tone. But yeah, still that never quite works for me. I thought songs like Crown had some really nice change of direction, where there was some kind of moves between the more kind of beautiful elements and then the more kind of tough sort of aggressive elements. I thought that worked well. I'm not a huge fan of grime in general. I'm not certainly not an expert on grime, but I thought it was definitely glad I heard it. But yeah, the Kano is a far better album overall. If it's worth comparing, I don't know. And then the only other thing I've got on my notes is Ed Sheeran feature "Oh Dear." That's all I've written down. Because
he's on everything though. He's on an Eminem album. He's on everything.
And he seems to be. He's the kiss of death, isn't it? I mean, really. Yeah. It's just come on and just totally shut on the album, basically. Yeah. So no, that was pretty poor.
Yeah, definitely
very poor
about that song.
Yeah, exactly. That's all I got to say about that one.
Matt.
Yeah, I think we have a consensus about the Ed Sheeran song. But I think this is more consistent than his previous album. I do like it. I do think it is a little long, so maybe we could get rid of that Ed Sheeran song.
Yeah, let's do that.
And I think Fran touched a lot on like the ebb and flow of the album, like the tone, and he manages it pretty well. I just the actual type of songs, I think, gets more into, again, what Nick was saying. There's a little lack of pace. I think often my favorite songs by Stormzy are where he is really going for it, and that's like, I wouldn't want an album of all that, but I think there is a little bit too much of the slower paced songs on this to really to hit the heights of what he could potentially produce, essentially. But I think considering his I think he's very aware of his position in the genre. And
I think he is as well with the Crown song.
British culture, yeah. So like this feels like a safe and solid move for him, but not necessarily something where he's lighting fires.
Okay, Sam.
I find it interesting that you thought this was like a solid move for him. I remember when I first heard this album, I was really surprised by how down and introspective it was. Because it's not what I expected after the first one. I was a big fan of the first album, which I actually think is better than this. But I do really like this. It's just not the album that I would have expected him to make. I think outside of those few songs, I personally do like the Ed Sheeran song. So it's not a consensus.
Not quite a consensus.
But I did write down that you three will hate it. But
so you win.
It doesn't make any sense on this album. That's the thing, is that it doesn't fit with the rest of what it is. I think like there's like a run of songs that's like Rainfall and Rachel's Little Brother, and all of them kind of fit together. And then occasionally you'll get the hit single that needs to be there. Like I don't think. I can't even remember what it. Vossibop, the last track. It's like it doesn't make any sense being there, but it's a number one single, so it has to be there. But it doesn't really make sense within the album that he's made. Whereas I think on the first one, songs like Big Few Boots and Shut Up and Blinded by Your Grace, those big hit singles, I think made more sense. It was that was what the album was, because the rest of it sounded like that. Which so I was actually surprised he got nominated again, but then as listening to all of the albums, it dawns on you, you go, well, Stormzy kind of is the UK music scene. Like in terms of an artist that defines like the current generation of music fans and musicians that are big in the UK, Stormzy is like the number one. So it kind of makes sense that he would be here, and this album has been is great. So I think it's fine.
Ed Sheeran, of course. Ed Sheeran and him are just the power duo. It's why it's so good to have that song on this album.
I mean,
I think it's interesting though, the whole album, like you talk about the introspective side of it, and I think why I enjoyed this so much, I think, is that I've kept an eye on Stormzy since Glastonbury, and just the abuse he gets in the media and on social media from people about, every time he tries to do something positive for his community, he gets called racist against white people, and he just gets so much abuse. So to see him actually come at that in the way he did on this album, I thought that was what made it a strong album. It was nice to see. I think he's affected by it, and I think you can feel that in his words. I think it really gets to him. But rather than letting it beat him down a little bit, he's come at it quite well on this album, and I think that's what made it so interesting to me, I think, personally.
Yeah, it's very considered.
Yeah.
Which I didn't expect necessarily, because I'd heard Bossy Bop and I'd heard the Ed Sheeran song and stuff, and I was like, yeah, it's just another sort of grime album, but I think there was a lot more thought in it. I think, that's what I liked about it. Okay, that is all the albums. So should we have a quick conversation about what we thought of the playlist? I'm going to go to Nick first, because Nick's indicated something already, I think, so I'm interested to hear what.
Yeah, I'd say overall, I was quite disappointed by this collection of songs, this collection of albums. It just felt like nothing was thrilling enough, nothing was breaking new ground, nothing was really to the degree I would like to see, and nothing came at me that I was just like, I mean, the Anna Meredith was probably close in terms of weirdness, but nothing came to me that was just like, what the hell is this? It just felt like a lot of stuff that was within good, well-executed versions of genre albums. So that's what I would put with this. I wasn't in love with the list. I would say it was one of the weaker years of the last few years.
To say the total opposite to Nick, I thought it was one of the strongest lists I remember. I don't remember another time where there's been 6 albums I would be happy, and when I say 6, it's Kano, Moses Boyd, Laura Marling, Michael Kiwanuka, Porridge Radio, and Stormzy, and maybe even Charli XCX that I wouldn't mind seeing win it. So I think that's pretty strong.
Whereas for me, I would say one half of one of the albums, the second half of Laura Marling album, was worth winning, in my opinion.
I mean, you don't think the Kano album is worth winning this prize?
No, not really.
I mean, if any of those 4, like I said earlier, if Moses Boyd, Kano, Laura Marling or Michael Kiwanuka win, that would be the best winner since 2010 for me. So I thought it was a great list. With a few that undoubtedly one of the ones that I can't stand will win. So
that's why I put Porridge Radio. Yeah, I think I'm going to call you on that. Yeah,
but actually, one thing that wouldn't surprise me was middle of the pack album that we all mentioned, Lanterns of the Lake. I wouldn't be surprised to see that win. But I wouldn't be too happy if it did win. But I wouldn't cry. Yeah. Okay, we'll finish with the guests. So let's go to Matt. What did you think?
I thought it was really good. There's only one album I actively disliked. I think I'd be happy if 5 of them, different ones, win, and they're also quite different albums from each other, which I think is maybe not a feeling I've had before.
Yeah.
For feeling so like diverse about which ones I'd be super happy if they won. So I think I agree with Fran. It's one of the better lists. I think it's the best list we covered and one of the better lists I remember. But I have a terrible memory, so.
Me too.
Yeah, at the start of this podcast, which is our 34th episode, I had to explain to you how the podcast works, so you do have a terrible memory. But,
the special podcast. This is a special podcast.
Okay, Sam?
I'm going to agree with you too. I think it is one of the better lists. I think I can't remember a time where there was so many that I really, really liked. I think going into it, most of the ones that I really, really like, I already really, really liked. So I think I got quite lucky that there was lots of albums on there that I already loved. Looking down at my ranking of the idea that I would put a Laura Marling album as my 4th pick is quite impressive to me, because it kind of shows that there's lots in here that I really, really liked. But I don't think any of the ones I hate will win. But now that I've said that, then we're in for it. I think either way, I think it's probably not going to go the way any of us think. I think the one that I think could surprise people is the Sports Team album, because it's so not like anything else. And it's far and away the lowest in all of the odds of everything. which then instantly makes me think, okay then.
Real contender.
Yeah. But I really liked it, even if we can all agree that FK Twigs should have been on the list. Because it's pretty ridiculous.
And Ghost Poet. Come on.
And Murder Capital.
Yeah, fair enough. Those three.
Let's make the list longer.
Those three.
You mentioned Moses Boyd was your best pick, your best new one, Sam. Where does that finish in your list?
In my list, it's actually 6th, which shows. But it was the only one that broke through any of the ones I already knew. Yeah, which is decent.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, that's us. Thank you, Sam, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sam.
Cheers.
And let's all celebrate when Porridge Radio win.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so shall we speak about next time?
Yes, I'll be hosting.
So next time it's going to be a standard episode with Nick hosting. So what have you gone with, Nick?
I'm going to be doing the classic, which is Jane's Addiction's Ritual de la Habitual, and I'll be doing a playlist of super furry animals.
Cool. I've chosen the Proto Martyr album Ultimate Success Today and Chez Noir and Apollo's As God Intended.
And I picked Disclosure with their album Energy, and also Sev de Lisa with the album Shabrang.
I mean, Energy it makes you think, they're kind of giving away what kind of album that might be with that title, aren't they?
I hope it's quite dour. Yeah, that'd be good if it was.
It's a really slow folky album.
Yeah.
Well, it's not just energy, it's energy in all caps.
Oh, so. I'm going to hate it.
2 exclamation marks.
It's going to be another Go Team album, isn't it?
Purely the diction is all he needs to know, and he knows what the album's good or not.
All right, that's us. Cheers, Sam.
Thanks a lot,
Good to have you on
Sam.
again.
Cheers.
Speak soon.
Cheers.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.